Welcome back to the deep dive. It is Saturday, February 21st, 2026. And I have to say, just looking at the calendar, it really feels like we are living in a completely different era compared to just 2 years ago. I mean, do you remember 2024?
Oh, yeah. The absolute peak of the hype cycle.
Right. Everyone was talking about generative AI, chatbots, and how software was just going to eat the world. It was all excitement and, well, a lot of promises.
It was definitely the Wild West phase.
Yeah.
Companies were throwing software into cars just to see what would stick.
Exactly. But if you are working in the automotive industry right now, whether you are based in Detroit, Stuttgart, or Tokyo, you are not feeling that hype today. You are probably feeling, exhaustion.
Complete burnout.
Yeah, we are seeing a level of burnout in the engineering and compliance sectors that is completely unprecedented. And it is not because people are struggling to design nicer cup holders or, slightly faster electric motors.
Build the paperwork, the digital paperwork.
Right. It is because the fundamental ground rules for being a car company have just been rewritten, and the ink is finally dry on those new rules.
The party is over. The regulators have basically turned on the fluorescent lights in the room, and what they found wasn't pretty.
That is the perfect setup for today's deep dive. We are looking at a document today that explains exactly why everyone in this industry is so tired. And more importantly, how the survivors are going to actually make it through the next 12 months.
It's a survival guide, really.
It is. We are analyzing a technical strategy report titled EU NIS2 Directive, Automotive Industry Technology Strategy and Supply Chain Resilience Report.
I mean, it is not exactly a title that screams beach read, is it?
Definitely not. It is a mouthful. But the content inside is explosive. This isn't just an opinion piece from a random blog. This report is built on a very specific logic framework from McKinsey, the top-down, and MECE approach.
Right.
And it aggregates hard data from some serious heavyweights in the industry. We are talking about ETS, UL Solutions, and Plaxidity X.
We should probably pause on that MECE acronym for a second, just because it really explains the intensity of this report.
Go for it.
So, MECE stands for Mutually Exclusive, Collectively Exhaustive. It is a problem-solving framework that management consultants use to ensure that when you analyze a massive problem, like, say, global cybersecurity risk, you have covered every single square inch of the map.
Without overlapping.
Exactly, without overlapping. So mutually exclusive means no overlaps, and collectively exhaustive means no gaps, no stone left unturned.
Right. And when you apply that incredibly rigorous logic to the current state of automotive cybersecurity under these new EU laws, the picture that emerges is just daunting.
It shows that the industry has been operating with massive blind spots that are just no longer legally checking out.
Which brings us to the hook of today's discussion. Back in 2024, if we did a deep dive on car security, we would basically be talking about hackers taking over a steering wheel, right?
Or maybe unlocking a door remotely.
Yeah, stealing the car from a driveway using a laptop. We would be talking strictly about the product. The question was just, is the car safe?
Which, to be fair, was the right conversation for that time. That was the era of UN R155.
The vehicle type approval regulation?
Exactly. It was a regulation specifically about proving the vehicle itself was secure before you could sell it.
But today, that question has fundamentally shifted. It is no longer just, is the car safe? The new question we have to ask is the entire company resilient?
And not just the company.
Right, the company that supplies the company and the cloud provider that hosts the company. Are they all resilient enough to survive a cyber attack and keep the lights on?
We have moved completely from product compliance to enterprise resilience. And I know that might sound like just a buzzword shift from some corporate slide deck, but legally and technically, it is an earthquake.
Because we are talking about a shift from certifying a specific model of a sedan to literally certifying the operational viability of a global corporation.
Yes, if the corporation isn't secure, the car cannot be sold, period.
So, our mission today for you, our listener, is to unpack this NIS2 directive. We're going to explore why this specific directive is the root cause of the headaches stretching from the C-suite all the way down to the factory floor.
We'll be getting into the triple protection net.
Yes, the net the EU has thrown over the whole industry. And we are going to get very technical today. We are talking dynamic SBOMs, ASPICE integration, and AI fusion centers.
Because we really need to understand how companies are automating their way out of this crisis.
Automation is the key word there.
It is. Because, as we will see, automation is no longer a luxury for these companies. It is literally the only way to stay out of court.
Let's jump straight into section 1 of our deep dive, the regulatory tsunami. So what exactly is NIS2? We hear these acronyms all the time. GDPR, CRA, ISO 21434. Why is NIS2 the one that is causing the panic right now in 2026?
To really understand the panic, you have to understand the scope of what this law actually is. So NIS2 became national law across EU member states back in October 2024.
But laws like this always have a lag time, right?
Exactly. The implementation phase, the grace periods, the first wave of audits that is all hitting right now, today. And the key distinction you have to grasp here is the difference between vertical and horizontal regulation.
Let's break that down for the listener. Vertical versus horizontal.
Okay, so the auto industry loves vertical regulation. They're completely used to it. UN R155 is vertical. It looks at a vertical slice of the market, which is vehicles.
It's very specific.
Very. It asks, did you follow the correct engineering process to design this specific brake controller? If yes, you get a stamp from the regulator and you can sell the car. It is a gate check for a physical product.
Okay, got it. And horizontal.
Horizontal regulation sweeps across the entire economy.
Yeah.
NIS2 is horizontal. It applies to energy, healthcare, banking, digital infrastructure, and yes, transport.
So it doesn't care what you make.
Not at all. It designates companies not by their product, but by who they are.
Okay.
It labels them as essential entities or important entities. It essentially says to these car makers, you are now part of the critical infrastructure of Europe. We don't care if you make cars or toaster ovens. If you are big enough, your operational resilience is now a matter of national security.
That is just a massive shift in mindset. UN R155 protects the driver from a crashing car, but NIS2 protects society from the car company collapsing.
That is a very, very accurate way to frame it. And the report visualizes this entire regulatory framework as the triple protection net.
Let's talk about that net.
Imagine the EU has built a fortress, and it has 3 massive walls. Wall number 1 is NIS2. That protects the enterprise itself, your IT systems, your corporate email, your back-end servers, your physical factories.
Okay.
Okay, that's the outer wall.
Right. Then wall number 2 is the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act. That protects digital products broadly, basically anything with a chip that connects to a network.
And the inner wall.
Wall number 3 is UN R155 and R156. Those specifically protect the vehicle architecture and the software update mechanisms. I mean, just hearing that, it sounds like a massive amount of redundancy. I can easily imagine lead engineers just pulling their hair out saying, look, I just proved this car was safe for R155. Why do I have to prove it again for NIS2?
Oh, there's a ton of frustration. I hear it every day. But the regulators have a very clear counter-argument. They argue that these are completely different attack surfaces.
How so?
Well, you could have a perfectly secure car, totally R155 compliant, great firewalls in the vehicle, but it's built by a company whose corporate IT network is completely riddled with malware.
Which is a NIS2 violation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The triple net is designed to catch that exact discrepancy, because a compromised IT network eventually leads to a compromised product.
And what happens if you fall through that net? Because the report mentions consequences that go way, way beyond just getting a speeding ticket from the government.
We are talking about the corporate death penalty in some of these scenarios.
The corporate death penalty.
Yes. I mean, sure, the fines are huge. They can be up to a significant percentage of global turnover, very similar to how GDPR handles fines. But the report highlights a much scarier outcome, which is the loss of supply qualifications.
Explain how that works in practice.
Under NIS2, supply chain security is strictly mandatory. So let's say you are a Tier 1 supplier. You make the steering columns for a major European OEM.
A big critical part.
Very critical. If you, the supplier, fail your NIS2 audit because your internal enterprise security is weak, the OEM cannot legally buy from you anymore.
Wait, they have to stop buying the parts entirely?
Yes. You become radioactively non-compliant. You are essentially barred from the EU market until you fix your internal IT security.
So it's not just a matter of let's pay a fine, write it off as a cost of doing business, and keep the assembly line moving.
No.
Right.
It is shut down the factory until you pass the audit.
That is incredible. And that is exactly why the report calls this a strategic shift. This isn't a check-the-box compliance exercise anymore. It is literally your license to operate as a business.
Exactly.
This leads us perfectly into Section 2 of our deep dive. The report outlines what it calls the 3 dimensions of strategic shift. Basically, these are 3 ways the game has fundamentally changed for the industry. The first dimension is penetrating the supply chain.
This one is huge. It marks the absolute end of the walled garden era for car makers.
Because for 100 years, the OEM was the king, right?
Absolutely. They dictated all the specs. If a part failed, they just yelled at the supplier, demanded a refund, and moved on. But ultimately, the OEM could claim complete ignorance about how the supplier actually ran their internal business.
It was very much a not my factory, not my problem kind of attitude.
Precisely. But NIS2 completely pierces that corporate veil. It pushes the legal responsibility downwards. The regulation states that the essential entity, which is the car maker, is legally responsible for the cyber risk posed by its entire supply chain.
And we aren't just talking about the big Tier 1 suppliers here, right?
No, it goes down to Tier 2, Tier 3. Strictly speaking, it goes all the way down to Tier N.
That seems incredibly difficult to police. I mean, a modern electric vehicle has, what, 30,000 parts?
It is an absolute nightmare to police. But the scope is actually even wider than just the car parts. The report specifically calls out charging infrastructure operators as regulated entities now.
The CPOs.
Yes. Think about the risk scenario there. An OEM spends billions of dollars securing the vehicle architecture. They lock down the brakes, the steering, the infotainment. Then the driver takes that car and plugs it into a public charger on the side of the highway.
Right.
That charger is a high-voltage physical connection that links the car's internal battery management system directly to the national power grid. And simultaneously, it links to the open internet for payment processing and authentication.
It is a literal physical bridge between a moving vehicle and critical national infrastructure.
It's the dirty handshake. If that public charging station is compromised by a hacker, it can be used as a backdoor straight into the car. Or, conversely, a hacker could use a botnet of compromised cars to send a surge and attack the national grid through the chargers.
That is terrifying.
It is. And NIS2 recognizes this reality. It treats the CPO, the power grid, and the OEM as one continuous interconnected risk surface. You can no longer just secure your specific device. You have to secure the entire handshake.
Which brings us to the second dimension the report highlights, the fusion of defense. This is really about the internal silos within these massive legacy companies.
This is where the organizational psychology gets really interesting, because in a traditional car company, you essentially have three separate tribes.
Okay, who are the tribes?
First, you have IT, information technology. They manage the corporate laptops, the Outlook servers, the Wi-Fi in the lobby, the HR
The
systems,
typical corporate stuff.
right? Then you have OT, operational technology. They're in the factories. They manage the robotics, the heavy stamping presses, the automated assembly lines.
And historically, OT usually doesn't get along with IT.
Oh, they hate IT. It's a classic rivalry. IT always wants to patch systems and reboot servers for security. OT says, do not touch that machine. It has been running perfectly for 6 years, and if you reboot it, the line stops and we lose millions.
Right, their priorities are completely opposed. Uptime versus security.
Exactly. And then you have the third tribe, product engineering. These are the R&D folks who actually build the car itself. And traditionally, these three groups effectively work in three completely different universes.
But the hackers don't care about your internal org chart.
That is the crucial point the report makes. And it drops a statistic here that honestly just stops you in your tracks. Listen to this. 80% of industrial security incidents start with an intrusion into the IT system.
Wait, 80%?
80.
That is a staggering number. So you're telling me that all these millions spent on vehicle firewalls can basically be bypassed by a phishing email?
It completely flips the narrative we all have in our heads. We imagine hackers like they are in the movies, abseiling down the factory vents or sitting in a black van on the highway, wirelessly hacking a car as it drives by.
The Hollywood version.
Exactly. But in reality, the hacker sends a very polite, well-crafted phishing email to Bob in accounts payable.
Poor Bob.
Bob clicks the link to view an invoice. The hacker gets a foothold into the enterprise IT network.
And from there?
From there, they move laterally. They slowly navigate the corporate network until they find the bridge that connects IT to the OT network in the factory. Then they shut down the production line and demand a massive ransom. Or even worse, they find the bridge to the cloud infrastructure, the back-end servers that talk to the entire fleet of cars on the road. And they use that trusted connection to push a malicious over-the-air update to 100,000 vehicles at once.
So if you are the chief product security officer and you are spending your entire budget locking down the car's ECU, but you aren't talking to the IT guy who is supposed to be securing Bob's email.
You are meticulously locking the front door, putting a deadbolt on it, while leaving the entire back wall of the house completely missing.
Wow.
The fusion of defense means you can no longer separate IT, OT, and product. They are one single massive attack surface. If IT falls, the factory falls. And if the factory falls, the car is compromised.
That is a terrifying realization for companies that have spent decades keeping these departments intentionally separate. But as if that wasn't enough pressure, the third dimension is all about time. The report calls it extreme event reporting.
The need for speed. This is the part of NIS2 that has legal departments absolutely hyperventilating right now.
Because the report talks about this 24-hour rule. Let's dig into that.
Okay, under NIS2, if you are a designated critical entity and you detect a significant incident on your network, you must submit an early warning report to the competent national authority. So that's like the BSI in Germany or ANSSI in France, within 24 hours of becoming aware of the incident.
24 hours. I mean, in many of these legacy automotive companies, it takes 24 hours just to schedule a Zoom meeting to decide if an incident is actually significant.
Exactly. And the 24-hour mark is just the early warning. Within 72 hours, you have to follow up and provide a detailed incident notification.
What goes into that 72-hour report?
An initial assessment. You need to explain the severity of the attack, the potential operational impact, and provide the technical indicators of compromise. And then, 1 month later, you have to submit a comprehensive final report.
Why are the regulators pushing timelines that are so incredibly aggressive?
Because in modern cyber warfare, contagion is virtually instantaneous. The regulators know that if one major steering supplier is hit with a worm, every other company connected to them is at extreme risk within minutes.
They need to build a defense net fast.
They need that data immediately, so the national cyber agencies can coordinate a defense across the entire sector. But for the individual company, it creates an impossible operational constraint.
Because humans just can't work that fast.
Humans absolutely cannot do it manually. Think about the old process. If you are relying on a human security analyst to see a red light on a dashboard, open up a spreadsheet, call their manager, get approval from the legal department, draft a formal PDF, and email it to the government.
The deadline passed 4 hours ago.
Exactly. You are already legally non-compliant before you've even hit send.
Which means the only realistic solution is to take the humans entirely out of the loop, or at least out of the initial drafting loop.
You have to automate. If you don't have scripts handling this initial reporting, you are just dead in the water under NIS2.
That really sets the stage perfectly for Section 3. Core technology evolution. We have defined this massive problem. We have horizontal regulation, total supply chain liability, fused attack surfaces, and these impossible 24-hour deadlines.
It's a perfect storm.
So now let's talk about how to survive the storm. The report details 4 specific technological solutions that the smart companies are deploying right now. The first one addresses something it calls the black box problem.
This is a battle that has been raging in the automotive industry for 20 years. You see, suppliers, the companies that actually manufacture the transmission controllers, the radar units, the infotainment screens, they treat their proprietary software as a heavily guarded trade secret.
So they sell the car maker a black box.
Exactly. They say, here is the physical part. It works to your specifications. But do not ask us how it works internally.
Don't ask to see the code.
Right. They provide the hardware and what we call the binary files. That's the compiled machine code, just the ones and zeros that the processor reads. They absolutely do not provide the source code, which is the human-readable recipe of how the software was built.
Why is this black box model such a massive problem for NIS2 compliance?
Because of vulnerability management. Let's look at a real-world scenario. Say a massive new vulnerability is discovered in a very common open-source software library. Something huge, like the Log4j crisis a few years back, or a critical flaw in OpenSSL.
Every security team in the world starts panicking.
Right. The OEM's chief information security officer wakes up, sees the news, and immediately asks their team, do we have this vulnerable code running inside our cars right now?
And if they only have black boxes from their suppliers?
They don't know. They are completely blind. They literally cannot answer the question. They have to send out emails to 500 different suppliers and beg for an answer. Hey, are you guys using that broken library in the part you sold us?
And the suppliers might take weeks to answer.
Or they might lie. Or, very often, the supplier might not even know themselves because they bought code from a sub-supplier. Meanwhile, under NIS2, remember, that 24-hour clock is relentlessly ticking. You cannot accurately report a severe risk to the government if you don't even know you are vulnerable.
So tech solution number 1 is dynamic SBOM and binary scanning.
Right. SBOM stands for Software Bill of Materials. It is simply the ingredients list of your software. And the technology strategy being deployed here is highly aggressive.
Because the suppliers won't just hand over the list.
Exactly. Since the suppliers are so reluctant to share their source code, the OEMs are turning to specialized tools. The report mentions a tool called Secure Analyze EE as a prime example of this. These tools are designed to reverse engineer the compiled binary files.
They're essentially X-raying the black box without opening it.
That is exactly what they are doing. These tools scan the compiled opaque binary code and mathematically reconstruct the SBOM. They look for the unique digital fingerprints of known open-source libraries, third-party network stacks, and encryption modules hiding inside that binary.
That seems like a massive game changer. You don't have to rely on trusting the supplier anymore. You can cryptographically verify the ingredients yourself.
It shifts the power dynamic completely back to the OEM. The car maker can now generate its own highly accurate SBOMs directly from the binaries they receive. And then, the critical part, they take that massive ingredients list and continuously automatically scan it against the global CVE database.
The common vulnerabilities and exposures list. So the absolute second a new hacker trick is published online, the system instantly knows if the car is at risk.
Without ever having to ask the supplier, it grants the essential entity the exact digital visibility they are legally mandated to have.
Okay, so you have the ingredients list, you found the flaw, but knowing you are vulnerable is very different from actually managing that risk in the real world. Which leads us to tech solution 2, continuous TERA.
TERA. It stands for Threat Analysis and Risk Assessment. Now, in the old days, and by old days, I literally mean 2023, this TERA process was just a static document.
Like a Word doc.
A literal Word document or a massive Excel spreadsheet. A systems engineer would sit down during the initial vehicle design phase, brainstorm all the hypothetical bad things that could possibly happen, assign an arbitrary risk score from 1 to 10, save the file, and declare the analysis complete.
And then that Excel file just gathers digital dust on a server while the car is actually driving around on the road for the next 15 years.
Exactly. That is what we call static TARA. And it is completely useless in an NIS2 world because the global threat landscape literally changes every single day. The report strongly advocates moving to model-based dynamic TARA.
Walk me through how the dynamic part of that actually works.
Okay, imagine building a complete digital graph, a virtual model of the entire car's electronic architecture.
Like a digital twin.
Yes. This model knows that the external Bluetooth radio physically connects to the internal infotainment unit. It knows the infotainment unit connects to the central gateway. And it knows the gateway connects to the critical safety systems, like the brakes. It understands every single digital pathway in the vehicle.
It's basically a map of the car's brain and nervous system.
Exactly. Now, you connect that architectural map to the live, real-time SBOM scanning we just talked about.
Okay, I see where this is going.
So let's say the automated binary scanner suddenly flags a brand new zero-day bug in the Bluetooth stack. The dynamic system instantly injects that new threat into the architectural model. It calculates the potential attack path. It computationally asks, can a hacker use this specific Bluetooth bug to eventually reach the brake controller?
And if the math says yes,
It automatically, in real time, updates the overall risk score for that entire vehicle platform from, say, low to critical. It does the complex math instantly. It doesn't wait for a human engineer to come back from vacation and open an Excel sheet. It creates a living, breathing view of the vehicle's true risk posture.
that is just incredible. It's like giving the car an immune system that reacts instantly to a new virus variant. But then, of course, comes the legal nightmare we discussed. You found the bug automatically. You calculated the critical risk automatically. Now you have 24 hours to tell the government.
Right.
That leads perfectly to tech solution 3, automated reporting and ASPIS integration.
This is where the pure engineering world collides head-on with corporate bureaucracy. The report discusses deeply integrating this technical workflow with an industry standard called ASPIS ECP.9.
ASPIS ECP.9, that sounds like a model number for a Terminator robot.
It does. It stands for Automotive SPICE EE Process Group Support, process number 9. It is titled Problem Resolution Management. Basically, it is the rigid, audited standard for how automotive engineers are supposed to track software bugs and support tickets.
So how does this solve the 24-hour reporting problem?
The strategy here is to build a robust API bridge.
An automated bridge between the engineers finding the bug and the lawyers reporting it.
Precisely. Between the vulnerability scanner and the corporate ticketing system. When that dynamic TAR system we just described flags a new risk as critical, It doesn't just send an email. It automatically creates a fully populated SUP.9 compliance ticket in the system. But it goes one crucial step further. If the ticket meets certain high-risk criteria, for example, a tag like confirmed remote code execution and automated script immediately triggers.
And that script writes the actual legal NIS2 report.
It drafts it perfectly. It pulls the exact timestamp of discovery, the highly technical description of the flaw, the affected asset IDs across the fleet, and it formats all of that data into the very specific template required by the National Cybersecurity Authority.
Wow.
Then, it pings the legal compliance officer with an urgent alert saying, "Critical incident detected. Official report drafted. Please review and approve to send."
That cuts the bureaucratic reaction time down from days to literal minutes.
It is genuinely the only way a company can survive the 24-hour rule. You are completely automating the discover to draft phase of compliance.
The final core tech solution mentioned in the report is the VSOC Fusion. We touched briefly on Fusion earlier, but this is talking about the actual physical command center, right?
Yes, the Vehicle Security Operations Center, or VSOC, but a totally next-generation version of it. You see, most current corporate SOCs are heavily siloed. You have an IT SOC sitting in one building watching the corporate firewalls, and maybe you have a smaller, separate VSOC in another building watching the telemetry from the connected cars.
And never the twain shall meet. They don't share their data.
Rarely. The Fusion VSOC forces all of those disparate data streams into one massive data lake. Enterprise IT logs, OT factory floor logs, and live vehicle telemetry all in one place. And it uses advanced AI and those digital twins we mentioned to provide something crucial: context.
I really want to dig into that word, context. Why do we need a digital twin and IT logs just to catch someone hacking a car? Give me a concrete scenario of how this helps.
Okay, let's look at a classic false positive problem that plagues these centers. Imagine a connected car is driving down the highway and it suddenly sends a critical error code back to the server. Fuel pump voltage irregular. Engine stalled.
Okay, that sounds entirely like a mechanical breakdown, a broken fuel pump.
Exactly. If you are a traditional VSOC analyst just looking at the isolated car data, you log a mechanical failure and you dispatch a tow truck to the GPS coordinates. Case closed.
But the Fusion VSOC sees more.
The Fusion VSOC looks at the total context. It sees that car's error, yes. But it also sees that exactly 10 minutes prior, there was a massive brute force login attempt on the IT cloud server that specifically manages the over-the-air firmware updates for the powertrain.
Oh, wow.
And crucially, the Fusion system sees that 500 other cars in that exact same city are reporting the exact same fuel pump error code within the same 5-minute window.
Okay, yeah. 500 physical fuel pumps do not spontaneously break at the exact same time.
Exactly. The digital twin and the AI allow the system to instantly correlate those completely disparate signals from IT and the product. It connects the dots and says, this is not a mechanical failure fleet-wide. This is a highly coordinated cyber attack on the powertrain control module, executed via a compromised cloud server.
And you can only see that attack pattern if you have all the data pooled in one centralized place.
If you were just the IT guy looking at the cloud logs, you'd see a failed login attempt and think, no big deal, the firewall held. If you were just the car guy, you'd see a break and pump and think, bad batch of parts. Only by fusing them do you see the actual warfare happening. That is what context-aware defense means.
That is just fascinating. It really drives home why these organizational silos have to come down immediately. But, and in this industry, there is always a huge but, actually implementing all of this sounds staggeringly difficult.
It is the hardest thing they have ever done.
Which brings us to Section 4. The report does not sugarcoat the engineering implementation challenges. And it identifies the peer end blind spot as a primary hurdle. Let's talk about Steve.
Yes. This is the brutal reality check for the whole system. We can sit here and talk about fancy AI fusion centers and dynamic graph models all day, but the physical automotive supply chain is incredibly deep and, quite frankly, technologically dirty.
Right. You have your massive tier ones like a Bosch or a Continental. They're highly sophisticated tech companies in their own right.
Yes, they can handle this. But then you go down the chain to Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4.
We are talking about very small, highly specialized companies.
Exactly. We're talking about a 50-person company in a small town that molds plastic housings for sensors. And maybe they include a tiny, cheap microcontroller they bought from somewhere else. These small suppliers do not have a robust IT department, let alone a cybersecurity team. They literally have a guy named Steve who comes in on Tuesdays and Thursdays to fix the office printer and update the antivirus.
And now, under NIS, the massive multi-billion-dollar OEM is legally demanding that Steve provide a real-time Cyclone DX formatted SBOM and agree to a 24-hour incident response SLA.
Exactly. The OEM is now legally liable for Steve's entire security posture. But Steve doesn't even know what the acronym SBOM stands for. This creates a massive, grinding friction point in the supply chain. The report accurately calls it the blind spot. The OEMs are legally demanding data formats that the lower-tier suppliers literally do not possess the technical capability to generate.
So the entire chain of compliance just breaks down at the bottom.
And the massive financial liability rolls right back up to the top. It is a very, very dangerous legal position for the OEMs right now.
Then there is challenge 2, which I think anyone working in corporate compliance will resonate with. Audit exhaustion. The paperwork maze.
I am seeing this everywhere in the field. Highly trained security teams are just burning out and quitting because these new regulations are heavily overlapping, but they are not identical.
They use different templates.
Right. So you have a cybersecurity team spending 3 months preparing evidence for the NIS2 operational audit. Then, the very next week, they have to pivot and prepare for the UN R155 CSMS audit. And a month later, they have an ASP-signed process assessment.
And the auditors are essentially asking for the exact same evidence of security.
They're asking for similar evidence, but they require it in completely different formats mapped to different frameworks. So your best engineers end up spending 60% of their time just rewriting the exact same risk report 3 different ways to satisfy 3 different sets of auditors.
The report explicitly warns about resource depletion here.
Yes, you are taking your absolute best cyber defenders, people who should be actively hunting hackers and analyzing threats, and you are turning them into glorified paperwork bureaucrats.
Which ironically makes the car company far less secure.
It absolutely does. It's a compliance paradox.
The third major challenge highlighted goes right back to those internal silos. Organizational walls.
This is the Game of Thrones aspect of corporate restructuring. NIS2 implicitly demands a unified, top-down command structure for security. But in the real world of a legacy automaker, the IT director usually reports to the chief financial officer. The factory manager reports to the chief operating officer. The R&D chief reports directly to the CEO.
They all have different bosses, different budgets, and different bonus metrics.
Exactly. And now you are asking them to voluntarily pool their fiercely guarded budgets to build one central Fusion VSOC. Good luck with that.
I can hear the arguments now.
Oh, they are intense. The IT guy says, why should my budget pay for vehicle telemetry monitoring? The R&D guy says, why should my engineering budget pay for factory firewalls? Breaking down those deeply entrenched political walls is very often much harder than writing the actual automation code.
So given all of these massive, seemingly intractable hurdles, what is the actual path forward? Section 5 covers strategic recommendations for 2026. If you are a leader navigating this space, what should you actually be doing today?
The report is very pragmatic here. It offers 4 clear, actionable strategies. The first one directly addresses that audit exhaustion problem we just talked about. It heavily suggests building a unified PCMS.
A product cybersecurity management system.
Right. It must act as a single source of truth for the whole enterprise. The core advice is, do not build separate compliance tracks for separate laws.
No NIS2 folder over here and R155 folder over there.
Exactly. Build one central, robust security process. Map the overlapping requirements. If both laws require strict configuration management, which they do build, one excellent process for that, and use automation to map the outputs to both audit frameworks simultaneously. Centralize your evidence so you only generate it once.
Strategy 2 is about fixing the supply chain. And the phrasing here sounds pretty aggressive, contractual force.
It has to be aggressive. You simply cannot ask suppliers nicely for this data anymore. The report strongly advises that all new supplier contracts must legally mandate the delivery of machine-readable SBOMs, and it specifically calls out the Cyclone DX format.
Why is mandating that specific Cyclone DX format so critical?
Interoperability. Think about the automation we need. If supplier A sends an SBOM in an Excel spreadsheet, and supplier B sends it as a PDF, and supplier C just sends a raw text file in an email, your million-dollar automated fusion center is broken. It can't read them. You need a universal, machine-readable language.
And Cyclone DX provides that structured XML or JSON data.
Yes. If the supplier doesn't use it, you literally cannot feed their data into your automated risk models.
The report also mentions mandating end-of-life technical handover mechanisms in these contracts. What does that mean in practice?
This is a crucial defense mechanism. Ask yourself, what happens if a key software supplier goes bankrupt? Or what if they pivot their business and just decide to stop supporting a specific network chip that is inside a million cars on the road?
Historically, the OEM is just totally out of luck.
Right. But in a strict NIS2 world, you cannot afford to be out of luck. You are legally responsible for that car's security for its entire life cycle. So you need a powerful contractual clause up front that says, if you ever stop supporting this product, you must immediately hand over the encryption keys and the raw source code to us.
That is a massive ask. Software suppliers guard their source code with their lives. They hate giving it up.
They absolutely hate it. It's their intellectual property. But the alternative is the car maker being held legally hostage by a defunct supplier, completely unable to patch a critical vulnerability in a vehicle that might be driving around for another decade. It is a necessary software escrow clause for the digital age.
Strategy 3 connects right back to the VSOC we discussed. Context-aware defense.
Yes, the high-level strategic advice here is simple. Stop treating the vehicle as an isolated digital island. If your entire cybersecurity strategy focuses only on the internal vehicle network, you are fighting the last war.
You have to integrate the telemetry.
You must seamlessly integrate the vehicle's internal intrusion detection system alerts with your corporate cloud logs and your enterprise IT logs immediately. If your security dashboard doesn't show the whole connected picture, it is actively lying to you by omission.
And finally, strategy 4 targets the software developers themselves. CI/CD pipeline integration.
This is implementing the shift left concept in a very real way.
Explain shift left for the listener.
Shifting left means moving the security testing to the earliest possible stage of the development process, the left side of the timeline. You have to stop treating security testing as a final gate right before the product launches. You need to embed that complex binary analysis and that dynamic TARA directly into the continuous integration and continuous deployment pipeline.
The CI/CD pipeline. So practically every single time a software developer hits save and the new code compiles.
The security scan runs automatically in the background. The dynamic risk score updates automatically. And if the developer's new code introduces a known vulnerability, the system automatically fails the build. The code is rejected before it ever reaches a testing vehicle.
You catch the illness at the moment of infection.
Exactly, not when the patient is already in the ICU. It provides real-time, continuous risk visibility from the very first line of code written, all the way until the car is finally scrapped in a junkyard 15 years later.
That concept of total lifecycle management is just massive. Now, before we wrap this up, we need to zoom out. We have been very heavily focused on the European Union today because of NIS2. But the automotive industry is intensely global. Section 6 looks at the global competitive landscape. How does this European approach stack up against the rest of the world?
It's becoming a highly fragmented regulatory map. The report literally calls the EU the fortress. Right now, it has the strictest, most comprehensive digital regulations on Earth because of that triple layering we discussed: NIS2, CRA, and UN R155. If you can engineer a car and a company that is legally compliant in Europe, you are technically fit to operate almost anywhere else in the world.
What about North America? How is the U.S. handling this?
The U.S. is taking a completely different philosophical approach. They do not have a single, massive, top-down law like NIS2 that blankets the whole economy. Instead, they are focusing very heavily on supply chain defense through strict trade rules.
You mean the Department of Commerce restrictions we've been seeing?
Exactly. The Bureau of Industry and Security, the BIS, they aren't constantly auditing your operational uptime or your internal ticketing systems like Europe does. Instead, they are basically banning specific connected hardware and software components from countries of concern, mainly China.
It's a strict blacklist approach.
Right. It's the government saying you absolutely cannot use this specific communication chip and you cannot use this specific software stack in any vehicle on U.S. roads.
So if I can oversimplify, the EU says, prove to us mathematically that you are safe, and the US says, just don't use the bad guy stuff.
That is a rough but very accurate summary. For actual enterprise security standards, the U.S. relies heavily on the NIST CSF 2.0 framework, which is an excellent standard, but it is often voluntary or enforced via B2B contracts, rather than being a sweeping federal directive with massive fines attached like NIS2.
And what about Asia? Specifically, what is happening in China?
China is a fascinating case study because they have built a very strong, completely parallel regulatory system. They have a mandatory national standard called GB 44495, which is essentially their localized version of UN R155 for vehicle security.
And do they have a NIS2 equivalent?
Their data security law and cybersecurity law impose operational and reporting requirements on critical infrastructure that are functionally very similar to NIS2.
So structurally, it's quite similar to Europe.
Structurally, yes, but geographically and politically, no, because China mandates strict data localization. The server data generated by Chinese cars has to physically stay in China. The compliance systems have to be localized and isolated.
Oh, I see. So for a truly global car maker, say a Volkswagen, a Ford, or a Toyota, this regulatory fragmentation must be an absolute nightmare.
It is creating what we call the splinter net of automotive.
Mm.
To be a global player today, you essentially have to build localized compliance architectures. You need one massively complex tech stack just for the EU to satisfy NIS2 and GDPR. You need a completely separate, heavily air-gapped tech stack in China to satisfy their localization laws. And you need a third, highly vetted supply chain strategy for the U.S. to navigate the BIS trade bans.
So much for global economies of scale.
The era of designing one car platform and selling it exactly the same way globally is over. Efficiency is dead. Complexity is the new normal.
We have covered a truly massive amount of ground today. We started with this fundamental shift from isolated product compliance to total enterprise resilience. We looked at the terrifying realities of those 24-hour reporting deadlines. We really geeked out on the dynamic SBOMs, the automated ASPIS API reporting, and those AI-driven fusion centers. And we just saw how the global map is totally fracturing into different regulatory fortresses.
It is a lot for anyone to process.
It is. So if you had to synthesize all of this for our listener, the ultimate bottom line of this deep dive, what would it be?
I think the real key takeaway here is that the automotive industry is finally, painfully, growing up digitally. For 100 years, this was fundamentally a mechanical industry that occasionally dabbled in computers.
Adding screens to dashboards.
Right. But NIS2 is the blaring signal that this industry is now fully integrated into the digital critical infrastructure of society.
So it's no longer a car company. It's a tech company that happens to sell rolling hardware.
Exactly. And being a critical tech company forces extreme transparency. We are permanently moving away from a comfortable world of black boxes, handshake deals, and protected trade secrets, and moving into a world of forced transparency, continuous SBOM scanning, and massive shared operational risk. It is painful, it is causing burnout, and it is incredibly expensive. But it is entirely necessary. You cannot have a physically safe, modern society running on insecure digital infrastructure. And cars are now definitively infrastructure.
That is a really powerful thought to synthesize all this. And I actually want to leave our listeners today with one final, slightly provocative thought of our own, something to chew on after the deep dive.
Go for it.
We spent a lot of time today talking about protecting the actual car. We talked about locking down sensors, isolating the ECUs, and securing the public charging stations. But I keep going back to that one statistic you dropped. 80% of industrial attacks start in the basic IT network.
The boring old corporate office network.
Right. So here is my question for you, the listener. Are we spending billions of dollars meticulously armoring the vehicle, putting complex digital locks on the steering wheel, advanced AI firewalls in the engine, while simultaneously leaving the back door to the physical factory wide open through a simple phishing email?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. And honestly, looking at the budget splits in most of these legacy companies where the shiny product security department gets the tens of millions and the enterprise IT team just scrapes by on legacy systems, I genuinely worry the answer is yes.
If you are listening to this right now and you work in an organization where the corporate IT team and the vehicle engineering team still don't talk to each other, maybe you should be the one to schedule that meeting tomorrow morning.
Absolutely. Buy them a coffee.
Right.
Breaks the ice. It might literally save your company from the next audit.
On that note, thank you so much for diving deep with us today. Check your SBOMs, patch your enterprise servers, and good luck with the audit. We will see you in the next deep dive.
Stay secure out there.